Okay, so we need to establish one very important rule before we get into this. When something tries to kill you, you run away from it. That is the rule. That is the oldest rule. That is the rule that kept your ancestors alive for hundreds of thousands of years. See predator, run from predator. See fire, run from fire. See flood, run from flood. The direction you run might vary, but the concept is always the same. You identify the threat, you identify where the threat is coming from, and you go the other way.
Wow.
And then the ground started moving. Not a predator, not a fire, not a flood coming from one direction. The actual ground, the thing that has been reliably solid beneath human feet for every single second of every single day since the first human ever stood upright, just stopped being solid. It shook, it rolled, it cracked. It made a sound from underneath that had no source and no direction and no logical explanation. And every prehistoric human standing on that ground at that exact moment had the same thought at the same time. Where do you run when the thing you run on is the thing that is attacking you? The answer, as the archaeological and anthropological record strongly suggests, was absolute chaos. Different directions, all of them simultaneously. Because for the first time in human history, the threat detection system in the human brain, the one that had been perfectly calibrated over millions of years of evolution to identify a threat, locate its source, and generate a direction of escape, encountered a situation it was completely architecturally unprepared for. There was no source, there was no direction. The threat was everywhere and nowhere at the same time, and the human brain, faced with a problem it could not solve, did what it always does when it cannot solve a problem. It panicked and improvised. Welcome to the first earthquake in human history. It was not anyone's finest moment, and it was absolutely spectacular. Go back to the moment. Picture a group of early humans somewhere in the geologically active landscape of Eastern Africa or the Middle East, roughly 70 to 100,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens were beginning to spread into new territories and encountering new environments their species had never navigated before. They are doing normal prehistoric things. Hunting, gathering, arguing about whatever prehistoric humans argued about, which was probably the same things humans argue about today, just with fewer words. And then it starts. Not with the shaking, that is the thing nobody talks about. An earthquake does not begin with shaking, it begins with a sound. A deep, low-frequency rumble that you hear not with your ears but with your chest. A subsonic vibration that activates something very old and very deep in the mammalian nervous system, something that evolved specifically to detect the footsteps of very large predators approaching underground. Seismologist and science communicator Lucy Jones at the California Institute of Technology has spent decades studying both the physical mechanics of earthquakes and the human psychological response to them, and her research confirms something remarkable. The infrasound produced by large earthquakes in the seconds before the shaking begins triggers the same neurological fear response as a large predator approaching. Your ancient ancestor felt the earthquake before they heard it, and their body was already flooding with adrenaline before their conscious mind had any information about what was happening. And then the ground moved. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux, whose research on the fear response we have referenced before, would point out that what happened next in every prehistoric human brain in that area was a near-perfect demonstration of what happens when the amygdala receives a threat signal with no actionable information attached to it. The amygdala does not need to understand a threat to respond to it.
Nope.
It responds to the sensation of threat regardless of source or direction. Which means every human in that group experienced a full biological emergency response. Maximum adrenaline, maximum cortisol, heart rate spiking, muscles primed for explosive movement, tunnel vision activating in a situation where none of those responses had anywhere useful to go. You cannot sprint away from the ground. You cannot fight the ground. You cannot negotiate with the ground. The ground does not have a face or a direction or a weakness. It just shakes, and you shake with it. The result, anthropologists believe, was genuinely one of the most chaotic scenes in the history of the species. Some people fell down because the ground was no longer where their feet expected it to be. Some people ran in random directions and fell down again when the next wave of shaking hit. Some people froze completely, which is actually a documented neurological response called tonic immobility that occurs when the threat system is activated but no escape route is identified, basically the brain's version of a blue screen of death. And some people, the ones whose brains were wired toward that particular flavor of unhinged curiosity that we have come to associate with human nature at its most spectacular, looked around, looked at the ground, looked at the shaking trees, looked at the rocks falling from the hillside, and in the middle of all of this thought something along the lines of what is causing this and where is it coming from. Those people were arguably the most important humans at that moment, because they were doing something that no other species does during a physical emergency. They were asking a causal question, not just responding to the stimulus, asking what is the source of the stimulus and can I find it? Geologist and anthropologist Patrick Nunn at the University of the Sunshine Coast has spent years studying how ancient and indigenous populations encoded geological events, including earthquakes, into their oral traditions and spiritual beliefs. And what he found is one of the most fascinating intersections of science and culture in the entire archaeological record. Across virtually every ancient culture that experienced regular seismic activity, independently and without any contact with each other, human communities developed the same category of explanation. Something powerful was moving underneath the earth. The earth was alive. Something inside the earth was angry or restless or being disturbed. In ancient Japan, a giant catfish called Nemezu was blamed for causing earthquakes by thrashing under the islands. In ancient Greek mythology, the god Poseidon was called the Earth Shaker and was held responsible for seismic events. In ancient Mesoamerican traditions, an enormous crocodilian creature living beneath the world was believed to shift position and cause the earth above to tremble. In the mythology of the Algonquian people of North America, a great tortoise supported the world on its back and moved occasionally, causing earthquakes. Same phenomenon, same category of explanation, different creatures every time. This was not mythology born of ignorance. This was the human mind doing the most sophisticated thing it knows how to do: pattern recognition in the service of survival. If something is moving and you cannot see it, assume something large is moving beneath the surface you're standing on, because in the natural world that is almost always the right assumption. The sound of something large underground, the vibration of heavy footsteps, means predator, means danger, means move.
Wow!
The fact that in the case of an earthquake, the source of that underground movement is tectonic plates shifting rather than a giant animal is frankly irrelevant to a brain operating without geology textbooks. The pattern recognition was correct. The specific identification of the source was understandably wrong. And the explanation that resulted, that something vast and powerful lives beneath the earth and moves on its own schedule, was actually a remarkably sophisticated hypothesis given the available evidence. And here is the part that is genuinely mind-bending. These ancient explanations were not just stories, they were early warning systems. Geologist Kate Ravilius, writing about the relationship between ancient mythology and geological events, has documented multiple cases where indigenous oral traditions encoded specific information about past earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic events, with enough precision that modern geologists have used those stories to identify and date ancient seismic events that occurred before written records began. The story of Poseidon shaking the earth was not just theology, it was ancient data. The communities that remembered the earth shaker, that took the stories seriously, that passed the warning forward across generations, were communities that were better prepared for the next event than communities that had no cultural memory of what the ground could do. Your ancestors, standing in the middle of their first earthquake, falling down, getting up, looking around in confused terror at the shaking world, was doing something extraordinary. They were experiencing something their species had never collectively processed before, and within hours, maybe days, they were telling the story. Around a fire, probably. With gestures and sounds and the early imprecise tools of language, they were transmitting the information. The ground can shake, it makes this sound first. When it happens, go to open ground away from trees and cliff faces. We do not know why it happens, but it happens, and now you know. That transmission, that instinct to turn a terrifying experience into a story that could protect others, is one of the most uniquely human things in the archaeological record. Every other species that experienced that earthquake simply survived it or did not. Only humans processed it, narrated it, explained it, mythologized it, and passed it forward. So the next time you feel the ground shake, even a small tremor, and you notice that specific flavor of fear that is different from all other fears, the one that makes your brain go briefly offline because it cannot locate the source of the threat, that is not weakness. That is the oldest fear in the human library. The fear that the ground is not what it appears to be. The fear that the most fundamental assumption you make about the world, that the thing you stand on will remain solid, can be wrong. Your ancestor felt that fear for the first time without any warning and without any explanation, and they survived it. And then they told everyone about it. And now, in a way that is both ridiculous and profound, you know what they felt because they made sure you would. The ground can move. We know this now because they survived the first time it did. Guys, if you liked the video, make sure you hit that like button and do subscribe for more related content. Thanks for watching.